And that's a more formal intro than I usually do. Right, what's on the stereo? We've got, let's see if you can see this. It's not very visible, is it? That's the control. There you go, look, check this out. Keith Jarrett at the Blue Note, volumes 1 to 6, the complete recordings. Now this is amazing. I first found this back when I was studying jazz, actually. And Keith Jarrett, Gary Peacock, Jack DeJohnette, they did a week-long session at the Blue Note in New York. They recorded the whole thing. It's unbelievable. So this has been just what I've had on in the background as I've been working the last week or so. I highly recommend it. It's on Spotify now. Keith Jarrett didn't used to be on Spotify, but I think ECM have done some kind of deal with them, and they are. So good morning, how's it going? Say hi, let me know where you are. I can see all your messages, whether you're on Twitter or YouTube. And right, so what's been going on? Lots of stuff. But today, rather than answering a question, I want to tell you something that I've been pondering. And it's a quote that I heard recently. And I think it's highly, highly relevant to language learning, and it's something that I've been thinking closely about. Hey, Alex. And the quote is this. I'm reading it off my wall because I wrote it up and stuck it on my wall. On one level, wisdom is nothing more profound than an ability to follow one's own advice. How about that? On one level, wisdom is nothing more profound than an ability to follow one's own advice. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot myself for my own personal reasons, but language learning, as you know, someone who's watching me right now, you're watching someone on the internet talking about language learning. Here I am on a screen talking at you about language learning, and you're listening to what I have to say, right? And good choice. Out of everybody you could be watching, you made a great decision to tune in to watch me this morning. But I think we've all had this experience of listening to various different gurus and language people talking about language learning, getting all these ideas, advice for what you should be doing, how you should be studying. But then ultimately, it's down to you, right? This is the thing. Ultimately, you have to kind of take everything you've heard in the rounds. You've got to take all of the advice that's been coming your way, and you've got to think, right, what's my best guess now? What's my best bet at what I should be doing with my languages? There comes a point quite quickly, I think, where you know actually what you should be doing. But do you follow your own advice? So many people have told me before that they spend more time talking about how to learn a language than actually learning a language. I remember Kevin, my friend Kevin in Japan, said this to me. He wrote this on a Facebook post once. I spend more time listening to people talk about language learning than actually listening to my target language itself. And this is a very easy thing to slip into. It's part of the kind of siren call of the internet, isn't it? It's like, what are people, what's Olly saying today? What's the next guy saying today? But as Sam Harris says, wisdom can be, and this is not the only definition of wisdom, which is why the quote begins on one level, but on one level, wisdom actually is the ability, but I think also the faith and the stick-to-itiveness to take your own advice, be confident in what you are telling yourself that you should do, and then actually stick to it. I often find that really hard myself in various different areas. Other than language learning. Language learning is one of the few things I think where I do take my own advice. I tend to ignore what other people say, just do my own thing. And I guess because that's born out of lots and lots of experience, it kind of works. But I know for many people, let me just close this here, for many people, you can get addicted to listening to other people's advice and not actually follow your own inner voice saying, hey, you should do this, or you should do that. So something to ponder. Wisdom can be nothing more profound than an ability to follow one's own advice. What do you think? Type in a comment, let me know, and let me know what you think. Hey, Racine, who's doing Asimil every day, good on you. Anything you do every day is fine by me. Vladimir, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. So that's all I had to say, really. But I might stick around for a bit, since I'm online. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. I guess what I might do is I'll tell you a little bit about Well, why don't I tell you what my own advice for myself is, because that's at least what it has been recently, because that's what I've been thinking about. So I started picking up my Japanese study quite a bit last year, and I was kind of regularly reading articles that were interesting to me, and just spending time with the language. And then I went on holiday at Christmas, went to Australia for a couple of weeks, and just stopped doing everything, basically. And then got back here, and then like a bunch of stuff kind of came up, and I just stopped doing it. I stopped doing all of the things that I had got into the habit of doing the year before. So I stopped going to the gym so regularly. I stopped all my Japanese, and I just like fell off the horse. And as Daniel says, hey Daniel, good to see you. I'm great at giving people advice and then not taking it myself. And so, yeah, I basically just went back and started to listen to my own advice again. And so I started just reading a little bit of Japanese every day, doing what I know to be right, and that was working. So, yeah. Paul. Hi, Paul. There's been no podcast for some time. What happened? Right, there's a problem here because I have been doing podcasts, but people haven't been receiving them. Paul, can you tell me, where do you get your podcasts? Because I think there is an issue with some. There's an issue with some some feeds don't seem to be working. Are you on Spotify? Are you Apple Podcasts? Where are you? Where are you getting your podcasts? I changed over my provider, and it looks like they haven't been Spotify. Right, there's a new feed, Paul. If you go into Spotify and search for me there, then you'll find it. But I'm just going to try doing this right now because we have had a few teething problems. I will teach you a language podcast, right? So opening it up. Yeah, no, it's not updating. Okay, right. So I need to get on the case with that. Yeah. So as Nick says, Paul, if you can find it elsewhere. It looks like Spotify is not updating properly, so I'll get on the case with that. But it is happening. So for now, if you could please just use Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or whatever you do, whatever you have on your phone, and then in the meantime, I will start to hassle Spotify. Spotify are difficult people to hassle because they're very big, and podcasts are not their bread and butter. So we kind of write to them and it disappears into an ether. But I've been doing regular episodes, twice a week for some weeks now, with some very interesting topics. So I'd love you to be listening, but we have to figure out what's going on because, yeah, I think there was an old feed and it hasn't updated. So, yeah. Thanks for the tip, Nick. Good to see you, Nick. Daniel, you still? Daniel's a good friend of mine. He's comes to all my events, which is very nice of him. He lives in Barcelona. And Daniel, what's your website? I've forgotten what your website is. You have a couple. Daniel also writes great books for all of you English learners out there. Urban says iTunes popped an episode on Tuesday, so it seems to work. Yeah, iTunes is definitely working. I mean, I can fire it up here on my phone, and we'll see what comes up. I will teach you a language. That's me. Here we go. Yep, there you go. New podcasts are dropping. 357 we're up to there. So yeah. Nick says, do you talk about your morning routine in any of your podcasts? I think maybe you do. Yeah, sometimes. But the thing, I'm always kind of wary of sounding like a broken record, Nick, because I've talked about that a lot, and then some time has gone past. So maybe I'll get back to talking about it. The truth is, if I'm being very honest with you, I don't have a morning routine at the moment. Because it's part of one of the things that have been sacrificed on the altar of a Christmas holiday. My morning routine just went to pot. So I would be lying through my teeth if I told you I had a morning routine at the moment. But I do have, in general, a morning routine that I've done for a long time, which works really well for me. And how you maintain your motivation. Yeah, so Nick's asking about my morning routine and maintaining my motivation. I mean, two very big topics. I think what I'll say for now, Nick, is that if you go back through the history of the podcast, there is tons of stuff on this. So it's all kind of there in the archives. But if you'd like to, what will be really cool is if you want to send me a specific question, then I can talk about it. It gives me a great way to talk about that on the podcast. So just go to I will teach you a language. God, it's such a pain to type my own website.com/ask. If you just go there and leave me a message, I will answer it on the podcast. I promise. Hey, Hare says he's Folk from Germany. I discovered you by listening to Luke's English podcast, and I like the way you talk in English. Awesome. Luke is brilliant. He's invited me onto his podcast many times, and quite a few people actually write to me saying, "Yeah, I discovered you on Luke's English podcast." Apparently, people like the way I talk English. I had no idea why. Right, what am I going to show you today? Let me show you. Well, since we're talking about English, let me show you this. New book, English short stories. Sorry, no, that's not the title. Short stories in English for intermediate learners. You see the intermediate here at the top? You see? There we go, intermediate. We've got the beginners and now we've got intermediate. Very British cover, obviously. It's kind of a Luke's English podcast-esque cover. So if you're learning English, feel free to grab yourself a copy of that book. Hey Mark, long time no see. Muy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? ¿Dónde estás? En México. Cool. All right then. Well, Tisla, how's it going? Shilongo. Good to see you. James, okay, all the questions are coming through now. Awesome. Hey, James. So James says, see if I can I, just wondering if I can put these questions on the screen. Let me see if I can do that, because it'll be helpful for you guys watching. Yeah, here we go. Just bear with me, guys. I'm just trying to add to... Okay, here we go. Got a button. James says, I bought your short stories in Italian book and I'm making my way through it. Awesome. Do you have any tips on how to remember the phrases and words? I'm using a flashcard app, but it's a slow process. Great question. So, remembering the phrases and words is obviously a big topic. We've covered it a lot on the podcast. So if you'd like to kind of go back to those various topics on memory and stuff, you can see that. But here's my basic take on this. These days, I actually go against the idea that you should be trying to remember words and phrases. Because the more that you try to remember and memorize words and phrases, the less time you're taking away from actually immersing yourself in the language. Okay? So, here's the Italian book. I don't know, James, if you've got the intermediate or the beginner book. This is the intermediate book. I think with a language like Italian, because it's very close to English, your brain can learn tons of stuff without you studying it. You've just got to give it the opportunity. So my main piece of advice for you, James, would be stop worrying about learning and memorizing them. Get through to the end of the book. All right, so your number one goal, this is the goal I'm giving you from me, make your way through to the end of the book. Don't worry about, you can look at the words and the word lists at the back. You can do all that stuff. But don't stop to study, don't stop to memorize, don't do any of that stuff. Just make your way through right to the end of the book. And you will find, I guarantee you, that words get stuck in your brain. It will happen. If you want, then you can go back and reread them. And then what you'll find is with a second reading, you will understand much more. You'll be able to memorize much more. And that is the most natural process that gives your brain the biggest opportunity to actually take in vocabulary and remember it. This is the kind of cornerstone of my story learning approach. It's that we're not trying to, kids when they learn languages, they're not sitting there with flashcards trying to memorize words. All right? Now, comparisons with how kids learn languages are fraught with problems, but I think one of the key things to take from how kids learn languages is that they get lots of immersion and exposure over many, many years. And so we've got to first and foremost try to replicate that. So work your way through right to the end of the book, enjoy it as much as you can, as best you can, and then go back, read it again, and this time notice how much more vocabulary you've learned. Then if you want to put vocabulary onto flashcards and do that stuff, that's fine, but take a very selective approach. So from one story you might choose, say, 4 or 5 words maximum. Put those on your flashcards and then try to focus on learning just the most important or most useful words. It really is a process of, like, on the one hand, giving yourself as much exposure as possible and by reading through to the end, and then secondly, to the extent that you want to memorize stuff, just be very selective, because then if you're selective, then you'll be more successful because you've got less to learn, and you're also prioritizing the most important stuff. Okay, does that make sense, James? Let me know. I know it's kind of a difficult thing to hear at first, but this is what I do and how I teach. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Daniel asks, how do you get past the initial "oh wow, this is hard" feeling in a new language? I did a bit of Mandarin a while ago and it was a bit demotivating. Yeah, so Asian languages are hard, and you need to give it time for your brain to acclimatize. So my approach with Asian languages is always to say, right, I am going to focus on the process, not on the product. And the process is going to be, I'm going to spend 30 minutes, 1 hour a day on this language, and I'm just going to go at it. And I'm not going to worry about how much I'm learning. I'm not going to worry if it's hard or it doesn't make sense. I'm just going to go at it. And then the game that you're playing here is giving your brain the time and the space to acclimatize to the language. I usually find with Asian languages that 6 months is a real kind of penny drop moment. So after you've been studying the language for 6 months, even if it's just like 15 minutes a day, after 6 months your brain has like reached a kind of critical mass of exposure where it starts to say, I really get it now. So what I would say, Daniel, is relax, don't worry about it, and just let time do the work. Urban asks about space repetition app. This always happens with these broadcasts. Like, I run out of things to say and then questions flood in. Yes, I recommend Flashcards Deluxe. Flashcards Deluxe is my favourite app. I use it. I think it's simple. It's a million times nicer than Anki. Everyone likes Anki. I don't, but whatever. It doesn't really matter what you use. I like Flashcards Deluxe. I recommend that. Okay, more questions here. Gabby asks about... Hey, Gabby. Intermediate short stories in French. Not yet, I'm afraid. James says it makes sense. Awesome. Okay. While you were learning Cantonese, apart from tones, what were the most challenging, such as word order or sentence final particles or aspect markers, blah, 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 blah. What was the most difficult thing? And what experience or advice can you please give to Cantonese learners to learn them better? Yeah. So Cantonese, man, is a hard one. It's really hard, Cantonese. I think my basic feeling about Cantonese is that all these things that you would use words for in English, in Cantonese are condensed into single things, like a single tone or a single particle or sentence marker or whatever. And so you've got the density of information is incredible. You can say a huge amount in just like 3 words, which you might use 20 words to say in English. So as a learner, the difficult thing is actually when you're trying to understand. It's like the speed of information that's coming at you. It's very difficult to kind of like really grab onto that. You have to learn a new way of talking. So I didn't find tones that hard, actually. I mean, I know it is normal to find tones hard. I think maybe because of my music background, tones were not that difficult. I've never had particular problems with tones. But the 2 things that I found quite difficult was word order, in the sense, not in the sense of like how we would, subject, verb, object, because that's the same in Cantonese and English, but rather what I found difficult was actually the way that you say something. So if I want to say, I don't know, like, so I was watching on TV the other day, like if we're on a bus and I want to say, how about you go and sit over there? Do you want to, do you want to sit over there? In English, we would think about things like saying, would you like to, how about, but trying to ways of making it polite. But in Cantonese, you just, 你坐嗰度, 你坐嗰度, like just giving like an instruction. And so you've got to kind of like learn the Cantonese way of thinking and saying stuff. And that was what was like really hard for me. I also find like the particles, sentence ending particles, la, ga, me, all those are like difficult. The main thing though is all this stuff, like with everything, it can be learnt naturally. So the most important thing is regular daily exposure. Listen, read and listen every day. Reading, of course, is hard, but that's a topic for another day. Janet says, maximum exposure, selective learning. Sounds like excellent advice. Thank you. I tried to do this and I find it pretty effective. Awesome. Good stuff, Janet. It's easier said than done, this approach, right? It's easy for me to say, oh yeah, do this. But your experience of actually sitting down with a book and saying, right, I am not going to stop and look up this word. I am just going to carry on not the picture, obviously. I'm going to carry on reading through the pages, and I'm not going to stop and look up words. Like, that is difficult. That really takes practice, and I still have to force myself and really kind of self-monitor to make sure that I don't just get caught up in the weeds. But yeah, if you do this over time, there is nothing more effective. Okay. Oh, George says, I read Olly's books till the end and then listen on Audible. That's fantastic. We have the audiobook versions available for all the stories, so yeah. You can also try reading and listening at the same time. Lots of people like that. And Jia Jingwen says, it's true with Mandarin. Yeah, you get a lot of information in a short sentence. Exactly. This is the hard thing about like Chinese family languages. Okay, a app point. I've used all the apps. Memorized, Duolingo, Mondly, you name it. Yet haven't found the best one. Therefore, normal go to school way has worked very well. Once a week and do homework. Yes, massive high five, double high five. Isn't it funny? Everyone uses Duolingo, etc., and they say how great it is, and yet, my challenge for you, and I will put $1,000 on the line here. Excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to sneeze. Excuse me. So everybody says, yeah, Duolingo is great, but find me one person who has become fluent in a language using Duolingo, or any app for that matter. You won't find them. And there's a reason for that. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. And in this case, it's because they don't help you very much. Yeah, they can be fun. Yeah, you can learn a bit of vocabulary with Duolingo, and better to use it than not. Better to use it than do nothing, right? Something is better than nothing. But in the real world, if we are having adult conversations about how to learn languages, put your apps away and just use an immersion-based approach to learning. Give yourself as much exposure as possible. Sorry to keep banging on about it, but I'd be dishonest if I didn't. I mean, look, you don't have to read mine, but there's lots of books out there. There's millions of books out there that you can read in different levels, different languages, that you can get audio from. It's about the volume of exposure. That's what you have to do. As Jarp's Art says, the normal go-to-school way, once a week with homework, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I think you have to do a lot more. I think on top of the regular traditional study, get yourself, make sure you're getting plenty of exposure and immersion, because then you're emulating how kids learn. But there's a lot to be said for just very straightforward study that you are consistent at and don't stop. Most people, they they don't fail because they study the wrong way. They fail because they just stop doing what they're doing and they're not consistent. Like, consistency with any method will trump anything else. Consistency. Like, the best method is the one that you actually use every day. So, Arvid, okay, another podcast question. The podcast, there are 2 episodes a week. I hesitate to say exactly what day, because I'm not particularly consistent with the day. I'm consistent with the podcast, but not consistent with the day. So just be subscribed, please, and you will get updates. For anyone listening on Spotify, it looks like the Spotify feed is not updating, so you might need to check it out on iTunes. But there are currently 2 podcast episodes a week, so please check that out. Hey Clay, good to see you. He says, hardest thing for me about Cantonese is figuring which dialect YouTube videos are in. Yeah, but see, Clay, for you, man, at your level, these are like first world problems, you know. For anyone to know, Clayton is an absolute ninja at this stuff, and his Cantonese is excellent. But yeah, it's basically a very unstandardized language, right? So, you know, it's kind of the Wild West out there with Cantonese. Okay, Ryan. Hey, Ryan, how's it going? I bought your French short stories book. Awesome, thank you. Exposure to the language through the book is good, but is it good for me to speak with native speakers at my current level? I would say it's up to you. I think speaking is always good if you enjoy it. Like, to the extent that you enjoy it, then go for it. I mean, you know, if you, the place to go, I'm going to put my special affiliate link here down in the chat. But if you go to italki, and you can get a free lesson there at italki with this link, then you can find teachers to practice speaking with, right? And if you enjoy it, then do it. I say there's no rush to start speaking, and generally my advice is, if you've got a method that's working, so you know, if you're reading a book and it's working for you, then keep doing it. Try not to screw with the method that is currently working for you. Try not to pile too much pressure on yourself. Just keep doing the thing that's working for you. Anything that feels beneficial, that you really feel like you're getting nourished and improving, keep doing that. And then the speaking thing, there's no rush, you know. Speaking is going to be much easier once you've learned a lot more and you're able to actually understand it and express yourself, you know. So I hope that helps. Andy Migara. What resources would you recommend for... This is turning into a mammoth Q&A. Every time I come on these now, it's like a mammoth Q&A. This is really cool. What resources would you recommend for learning Cantonese? Oof. As a beginner... it's difficult. I used Cantonese Class 101 quite a bit as a beginner, actually. I thought it was quite good. But really... the big thing is just availability of resources. I haven't found any good Cantonese books for learning, really. Partly because you've got issues over the romanization. You know, which system do you use? You've got written. Do you use Haoyu or Suminyu, like spoken Cantonese or written Cantonese? Because they're different. I would say, basically, it's like what I said to Daniel before. Learning Cantonese is a long-term thing, right? It's going to take you a long time. So I would caution against trying to look for the perfect resource or the perfect course. I'd kind of get what you can, whether it's the Complete Cantonese, for example, series. It's not very good, but it's okay. Work your way through it. Get the audio. Work through it. You're going to have to work through quite a few books and put up with a bunch of frustrating problems. So, but that's just the nature of Cantonese. So I would just get as many beginner resources as you can and work your way through them and start speaking as well. Contrary to what I said to Ryan, I think with Cantonese you've got to start speaking from the beginning, because it's not a language you can really study in a normal way. It's a spoken language. You've got to be speaking it. Life as Weknen within. Sorry, that pronunciation doesn't really work. Any idea where to find audiobooks in Levantine Arabic with English transliteration? No, but I know a guy who would. Reach out to my friend Donovan at Mesophanty Guild. Mesophanty Guild. Put the URL in here. Reach out to Donovan. Tell him I sent you, and ask him, because he will be able to help you. Okay, keeping up with the questions here. Ennis says, I learned German. I've learned a lot of words around B2, but I can't speak like a B2 level person. What do you recommend me for speaking? Okay, if you're at a B2 level, now you said you've learned a lot of words at B2 level. That doesn't necessarily mean you're at B2 level, right? Because to be at B2 encompasses a lot of things: speaking, listening, reading, writing, general comprehension, literacy, right? So it's not just about learning words. You may find that you need to just do a lot of... If you've been focusing only on words, you might find that you need to do some more study, because of German grammar is obviously quite tricky. But assuming that you are at a B2 level, but you can't speak like a B2 level person, there's only one thing that you have to do now, and that's speak. So I would go on italki. I gave the link in the chat just before. And I would find speaking partners and speak German every day. There comes a point with languages around an intermediate level, B1, B2 level, where there's only one thing that will help you get better at speaking, and that is lots of speaking. Bo Sheik says, what app do you suggest with learning Thai? I suggest no apps. I am anti-app. I suggest you delete them all off your phone and go back to learning with traditional immersion methods. Reading, learn the alphabet, learn to read, and start reading and listening to Thai. Put the apps away. They will distract you from the deep work that you need to do. Although I am coming out with a Thai product soon, which I'm really excited about. Thai and Russian, for those of you guys learning Thai and Russian. I have some immersion material heading your way. It's going to be coming out in the next month or so. It's called Immersion Lab, and it is tons and tons and tons of basically video recorded conversations with transcripts, translations, all that lovely stuff. So look out for that if you're learning Thai, because that will give you tons of exposure. So Arvid, yeah, so Arvid's talking about, I think it's just Cantonese. I have to go back and check. Oh, right, no, it's my podcast, right. The episodes are always listened up to far too quick. Yeah, I can't make enough of them, right? Well, hopefully these live streams help to kind of compensate for that. Just scrolling through the questions here, guys. Urban's asking about Korean novels. I don't know. I'm not a Korean guy, I'm afraid. Dixon, all right then. What are your thoughts on Ajax and MIA? What's MIA? Remind me what MIA is, Dixon. Is this Matt versus Japan's thing, mass immersion approach? Ajax, I think it's got all the semblances of a cult, and people kind of go really crazy with it. It's undoubtedly incredibly effective. Mass immersion approach, yeah. I think this is undoubtedly incredibly effective. It's basically what I teach. The difference would be that for me, the problem with Ajax is that it's just not practical for most people with a regular life and shit to do. Basically, there's not. It's you can't be sitting at work all day listening to Japanese through headphones in your ear. It's just not practical. So there needs to be a middle ground. I'm not very familiar with the MIA thing. I imagine it's something kind of similar. There needs to be a middle ground between like immersing yourself in real native content, which is too hard for you, and stuff that is actually comprehensible. And so the reason that I make these books is because they're comprehensible, right? They are at an A2, B1 level, or B1, B2 for the intermediate stuff. And you can actually understand it, and you can get to a point where you can process it in teaching speak. We say processing the text for meaning. so you can actually read it and derive real meaning and satisfaction from it. I think that's more important from a motivational point of view. If you go full on Ajax, I think that's cool, but you've got to. It's only going to work if you are like energetic, enthusiastic, and stubborn enough to do that for years. So I think it fails the practicality test for me, for most people. Questions, short stories for finish. Yep. On the way. Okay. Let me skip ahead to Rosie. Hey, Rosie. Rosie says, I've been trying to learn Italian for years. I can work my way through books and written stuff, but I have close relatives who are mega fluent and teach in Italy, and I want to get over my fear of being made fun of if I mispronounce words. It's been suggested I try another language with no emotional stuff. What's your opinion? No, I wouldn't do that, because that's just obfuscating the issue. So, Rosie, you've been learning Italian for years, and your comprehension, it seems, is pretty good. You can read and understand, but you're comparing yourself to people who live in Italy and are mega fluent. That's the problem. We are all on journeys with this stuff. I've been learning Japanese for years, and yet when I compare myself with someone like my friend Nick, who lives in Japan and is like mega fluent, I feel like an idiot. The key, there is only one thing that we have to do here, and that is to learn to be at peace with not being perfectly fluent and not being as good as the people around us. There will always be somebody else who's better than us. And language learning have to be for us to enjoy and to enrich our lives. They're not for anybody else. They're for us and for the people that we speak with. And comparison with other people will kill you. It will suck the love and the joy out of the language, and it will do nothing but cause you frustration. So I know it's easy to say, Rosie, but as far as possible, I would really encourage you to try and be outcome independent with this. So, in other words, try not to base your self-worth on how fluently you're speaking today, right? Or how you think you sound, or how many mistakes you make. Rather, focus on doing meaningful things with your Italian. And given that speaking is the thing that you're talking about, what I would really suggest is that you try to find a couple of people who you can speak with regularly, who you can communicate with in Italian and feel comfortable doing so. Speaking partners, tutors, friends, however you do it. As soon as you have people who you can speak with regularly in Italian and enjoy it, then you will start. Two things will happen. First of all, your level and fluency will start to improve, and secondly, you won't care what other people think, or you won't care about how good other people are, because you will be enjoying it for what it is. I think that this is the most profound, meaningful, important thing to say on this topic. For what it's worth, I still struggle with it in my languages. Every language I speak, I know people who are better than me. Does that mean I have no worth? Despite speaking 8 languages myself, it's all relative, right? It's like I heard this argument applied to income inequality recently, about how we're in a very unequal society at the moment, right? And capitalism, for all the great things it's done for the world, lifting people out of poverty, it has created huge amounts of income inequality. Now, to what extent is that a problem? Interesting question. Because if gap is the process, if the difference between Jeff Bezos and someone who's unemployed is the issue, so if it's the inequality from one person to the next that's the issue, then the millionaire when compared to Jeff Bezos is just as unequal and just as hard done by. Right? So that by that logic, the millionaire should feel pretty aggrieved because Jeff Bezos is so obscenely rich, right? So my point is that we can always compare ourselves to other people, but we have to do it for us. We have to find peace with ourselves. So I hope that helps, Rosie. Okay, I think we're probably drawing to a close here. We've been going for 40 minutes. Last one I'll take here is from Rasmus. Says Ajax claims, and by the way, anyone who doesn't know, Ajax stands for All Japanese All the Time. You can Google it and you can find a whole world of stuff there. Claims that immersing in content without any comprehension is useful. What are your thoughts on that? I would say that if the choice is between doing nothing and immersing yourself in content without any comprehension, then I'd say yes, it's useful to the extent that being surrounded by your language is always useful. However, I think in terms of how you spend your study time, there are far more useful things to do, namely immersing yourself in stuff that is comprehensible, because then you're going to learn so much more. So that's my basic position on that. Gabby says, Gabby likes my thoughts on that. Yeah. Everyone works hard, everyone gets different results. We're all naturally talented or not at different things, right? Yeah, okay. These questions keep on coming. Matthew said, is it reasonable to learn both Hebrew and Palestinian Arabic if one wishes to visit Israel or West Bank and interact with all native people? That's a difficult one. I think if we take this at face value, learning two languages, Hebrew and Arabic, is a lifetime's work. Let's be honest, right? It is. So working back from there, you could learn kind of basic Hebrew and basic Arabic for your kind of daily hellos, how are you, basic communication. And yeah, that's fine. I think, to learn kind of like travel Arabic and travel Hebrew, that's perfectly reasonable. There's no reason you can't do that. I think to aim to get beyond that and to actually really learn the language as such, I think is a bit ambitious, simply because learning two languages at the same time is never a good route. So, this might be one of those things where it's better not to let the great get in the way of the good. So I would probably suggest that you either learn just kind of the travel level for both, or else pick one language to go deep on, because language learning is a long-term thing, right? The best way to think about this, I think, is not what happens on this trip, but what happens in the next 5 years. Jim asks, when you're at the beginning of learning a new language, what are the initial methods or actions that you take to begin your learning process? Like, do you print out the top 1,000 words? Okay, Jim, good question. What language are you learning? I might be able to direct you to something for that. So essentially, I don't agree with these hacking methods like learn the top 1,000 words. I think it's a fake approach, and it's a short-sighted approach, because language learning is so much more than component parts. When I'm learning, I'm thinking about learning Swedish, and if I were to learn Swedish, what I would do is I would get a Swedish textbook and I would work my way through from the beginning to the end. That's the first thing I'd do. It would take me a month or two. I wouldn't pay attention to too much detail. I just work my way through it to get a foundation, and then I would listen to the audio, read the text, and then take it from there. You with any language, you want to be able to understand the essence of the language, and that comes from that doesn't come from learning a frequency list. Elliot, this question always comes up. Have you thought of using your knowledge of Cantonese to learn Mandarin Chinese? Yes, but I'm not going to, because Mandarin Chinese, I'm not interested particularly. No offense to all my Chinese friends, and I do have many Chinese friends. It's just there are only so many hours in the day and years in the life, and Mandarin Chinese is just not. It's not for me a priority. It's not something that I don't. It's not something I really want to do. So. I think if I were to do that, then my knowledge of Cantonese would definitely help. But I'm just not particularly interested in learning Chinese. So Jin's learning Spanish. So here's a link. Jin, you should be able to see this on YouTube, where I lay out my process for learning Spanish. So that might help you. Finn says, qual idioma é sua favorita? Deve ser o português, né? Deve ser o português. Mas também o japonês. O japonês, para mim, faz muitos anos agora que japonês é a língua que para mim fica na cabeça, sabe? Não consigo tirar fora. Urban says, where are we? This is very cool here, how I can see all your comments, guys. Technology is awesome. Urban can't. Well, anyway, for some reason I can't put this on the screen, but Urban says, "What's your current language you're learning, or your next one?" Yeah, I'm still learning Japanese. I will be for the rest of my life, I think. But I'm considering taking a detour into Swedish because I like Swedish. Arvid says, will you do something with Steve Kaufman in the near future? Maybe you could have another public conversation discussing how your views have changed over the last few years. After all, both of you have, let's say, refined your views. I would really like that, and I suspect others might as well. I love Steve, and I'm always up for a conversation with Steve. Maybe ping him a message and see if he's active at the moment. I haven't really been following Steve much recently, but he is the man. Rasmus again, okay, says, if you were to become an interpreter, would you have approached language learning differently? What would you have focused on more? I guess if you want to become an interpreter, you've first of all got to have a really good spoken level in the language, right? Prerequisite number one. And then number two, you've got to actually study and practice interpreting, because it is a skill all of its own. There's also a question of topic areas, right? Because if you're interpreting for, say, the European Union, for the European Parliament or something, you've got to know all the different political things that they talk about. So, yeah. All right, guys, we've been going for almost an hour, so I think I'm going to call it. So, thank you very much for being here and asking all your questions. Two quick things for you to do. Number one, please go and subscribe to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. It is not updating on Spotify at the moment, which is something I have to fix. But you can find it everywhere else. Please go and subscribe to the podcast. There's more of this everywhere for you. And then secondly, if you have one of my books of short stories, would you mind kindly leaving a review of the book on Amazon? It just takes a couple of seconds to do, but really would really help me. So if you have one of my books of short stories, please take a moment to go over to Amazon and leave a quick review. I'd be very, very grateful. I read all of the reviews, and so if I recognise you there, I'd be very, very happy. And yeah, that's it. See you next time. Bye bye.